I go to a nearby fast food restaurant all the time. Most of the time that I used to go there was late at night. I'm a senior in college, and I'm always busy with work and school. So for the last few years, I've often driven to that fast food restaurant drive-thru after long nights of work or studying. One night, about 2 months ago now, I was really hungry at about 11 o'clock at night. I drove to that restaurant to grab a quick meal as I was starving. It was only about 10 minutes away from my house. I went there and pulled into the drive-thru. This particular location was always open until midnight every night of the week, but that day when I got there, I couldn't see anyone inside of the restaurant. As I pulled into the drive-thru, without really thinking, I noticed nobody else was in the drive-thru and the lights in the restaurant seemed to be off. I knew they closed the lobby of the restaurant earlier than the drive-thru, so I wasn't really sure if they were still open or not. I drove to the speaker and rolled down my window. I didn't hear anybody on the other side. There was a few seconds of silence. I said, "Hey, are you guys still open?" and waited for a response. Several seconds went by and still there was nothing. I knew at this point they must have been closed, and I started to roll up my window when I heard something from the other end. There was a man's voice speaking, but I couldn't understand anything that he said. It sounded like when you have your mouth way too close to the phone and you can't understand any of the words. I asked them to repeat what they had said, but there was once again no response. This time, I decided to drive away and go somewhere else. I pulled slowly through the rest of the drive-thru, and as I got to the first drive-thru window, I could see that there was nobody there. After that, I drove to the second window, and the lights were off as well, but there appeared to be a man in the window looking at me. As I passed by the window, I watched him standing there, moving his eyes along with my car without moving his head. It was strange to say the least. I thought about rolling down my window and saying something, but honestly this just freaked me out, and I drove away to a nearby gas station and got food there instead. The next night, I found myself in a similar situation of getting off work late at night and was once again really hungry. It was only 10:30 this time though, so I decided to go back and see if they were open. When I arrived, I could see there were several cars in the drive-thru already, so I pulled in. They were in fact open, and I was waiting in line until it was my turn. I ordered my food, and when I got to the window to pay, I asked if they had changed their hours. The woman working there told me no, that they had not changed their hours and they just closed at 9 the previous night due to a shortage of staff. I mentioned how I had seen a man inside the window at almost midnight yesterday. The woman got suspicious, and the worker standing beside her noticed it and came to the window as he heard me talking about it. He pulled the woman back and asked me angrily, "Can I help you with anything?" I shook my head and drove away. I knew at that moment there was something wrong with that guy, and I'm assuming that's the guy that I ran into the previous night. Now it's about 2 months later now, and the restaurant is actually closed permanently. I always wonder about that man I saw inside the restaurant and what he was doing there exactly. Either way, I found a new restaurant to go to late at night now, but this memory still creeps me out from time to time. Some time ago, I started working at a fast food restaurant. It was a privately owned restaurant and near my house, so it was pretty convenient for me to work there. The restaurant was famous among people due to the big menu it offered with different cuisines, but it had a dark history related to it that no one is aware of besides those who work here or those who have owned it. This restaurant has been a place of mysterious death for the 2 people who previously owned it. We were not aware of these incidents until one day when our boss gathered us in the dining area for a staff meeting as she had to discuss something really important. Let me just say, I'm not a very superstitious person or someone who believes in paranormal stuff, but as we sat quietly listening to the boss, something strange occurred. The front entrance door to the restaurant suddenly opened halfway and then closed carefully after a moment, almost as if someone had entered or left the place. However, there was no one on the other side of the door since it was mostly glass and we would have seen the person. We exchanged confused glances, but attributed it to a breeze, considering that the back door was open. Our boss sat us down and said, "This is what I wanted to talk about in the first place. This restaurant has been famous for paranormal incidences for a long time, and that is considered to be the reason for the tragic and mysterious deaths of its previous owners. But there is nothing to be worried about. It'll pass on with some time, and everything will be back to normal again." My first thought was, is this lady crazy, and why call a meeting to talk about this? But those paranormal incidences kept on happening, and I couldn't explain it either. Another strange incident involved a coworker who was at the restaurant alone one night. According to her, shortly after turning a corner past the shelf with tools on it, an empty cordless drill case flew past her head, narrowly missing her and crashing into the wall. She seemed quite disturbed when she recounted the experience to us in the kitchen the next day. Once again, I had a hard time believing this, as that just sounds impossible. Another incident is our boss occasionally asked us why someone had walked by her office, even though none of us had passed her office during those times. Additionally, my coworkers heard faint voices, doors opening and closing unexpectedly, and some creepy eerie whispers just behind their ears. However, the most terrifying paranormal experience occurred late at night and might have made me a believer. One night, it was probably about 11. There was no one in the restaurant. My boss and I were on the cooking line, and another employee was on the dishwasher duty. All three of us were working in the kitchen. Everything was normal until suddenly we heard someone whispering in a very low voice that none of us understood. That left us all in a state of shock. We exchanged puzzled looks, and I said, "What the hell? Who was it? And why is it so eerily quiet all of a sudden?" I questioned the dishwasher, looking suspicious. My boss, too, seemed unsettled. "I don't know," she replied nervously, with her voice trailing off. She turned to me and instructed me to check if the fridges and hood fans were running. As I made my way near the fridge, I felt as if someone had taken a deep breath just behind my ear. I quickly ran back to my boss and told her that everything was working fine, but there was something else near us here. All of a sudden, we started hearing those whispers again. This time, they were quite loud. After a few minutes, I began to experience tunnel vision. I informed my boss, who advised me to step outside for fresh air, and I followed her suggestion. As I finished my shift about an hour later, I drove home in record time. Throughout the night, I struggled to sleep, feeling on edge. When I did manage to drift into slumber, I was abruptly awakened multiple times by terrifying visions and a burning pain on my ear. I finally was able to fall asleep for an extended amount of time, and when I woke up, I felt refreshed. I thought about last night's events, and thinking if all this stuff was true, or if there was some sort of chemical or gas leak that made us all hallucinate this whole thing. I brushed it off and went into my normal routine of eating breakfast and showering. When I got out of the shower, I looked in the mirror, and the ear that was burning throughout the night had what looked like small scratches on the back of it. I truly can't explain this, and I must say, from this point on in my life, I've been way more aware of paranormal events. Call me crazy, but this is an experience I've never forgotten. I lived in a town that used to get extremely dark at night. I started a job at a nearby fast food restaurant. My main job there was to deliver food to customers, and I was mainly on the night shift. Most of the time, the town was still and silent. I would barely see anyone at night during my deliveries. I knew every road, crooked path, and shortcut, as I have delivered pizzas and burgers to almost every street in town. But there is one street that I always avoided. This street was really run down. All the houses on this street were abandoned, except for the house at the very end. People said an old man used to live there, a mysterious person who spoke to no one, and neither anyone spoke to him. Rumors had it that he had caused a fire back in the 90s. It was a deadly fire that burnt his house and his whole family, but he wasn't charged for any of it because there was no evidence and he remained free. One night, when I was just scrolling my phone, waiting for an order to come through, the lady that worked at the front counter started screaming and said someone was continuously laughing in a creepy tone on the phone. The phone was hanging by the cord after she dropped it. The owner didn't care much about it and picked up the phone, wrote an order for 5 large pizzas, and ended the call. When he told me the address, my blood ran cold and I refused straight away. It was the same creepy house. Order of 5 large pizzas for that one creepy person isn't normal. The owner wasn't aware of the rumors of that house, so he insisted on delivering the order. So with my job on the line, I had to do it anyways. Chills crawled up my spine as I approached the sinister street. The house was completely dark, not a light on, and its windows were broken. All of a sudden, a rustling sound came from the bushes, followed by whispers of someone calling me over. I turned on my phone's flashlight and called out, "Hello?" There was no response. After standing there for a couple of seconds, I walked up to the house's door. I rang the doorbell and it didn't work. I then put my phone in my pocket and decided to knock on the door. After waiting a couple of seconds, I hear what sounds like a chuckle on the other side of the door. This made me nervous as I start to back away. The door swung open with force, and a man that looks like he hasn't shaven in weeks was standing at the door holding a lit candle. He had a very large grin on his face. I stutter out, "Hello, I have the 5 large pizzas you ordered." Then again, that creepy chuckle started, which I assume is the one the lady at my work heard. I was uncomfortable, and I started to walk backwards again. He said, "Where do you think you're going? Those are my pizzas." I replied, "Yes sir, I just need the cash and then I can hand them over." He reached in his pocket and took out some money. The money was covered in what looked to be grease from a car or something. But when I say it was covered, it wasn't just some normal grease you get on your hands when working on a car, but literally covered in grease. He looked down at the money and started laughing again. I told him sorry, I can't accept that. His face went blank, and I swear he had the scariest straight face I've ever seen. He then walked closer to me and said, "Listen, I ordered those pizzas, so you're going to give them to me, or we are going to have a problem." At this point, I was thinking to myself, is this really worth risking my life over a couple pizzas? I said to the guy, "Just take the pizzas, I don't want any trouble, okay?" The grin returned to his face, along with the laughter, and he snatched the pizzas from my hand. I ran back to my car, started it up, and drove away, but when I looked back, the old creepy man was standing in the middle of the street just in front of the house laughing like a maniac. On the drive home, I kept thinking to myself, was that really the man that all these rumors spread from? It was definitely a creepy encounter, and I think the reason I was so worried is because of all the rumors surrounding that house. If I hadn't known the rumors, maybe I would have acted a little differently. When I got back to the restaurant, the owner was mad at me because I didn't bring back any money for the food I delivered, but was at least glad I got back safe.